The weather is warming up outside and you know what that means. Springtime bass fishing is among us. I am stoked. The lakes are still frozen here in Michigan. That being said, with the sun that we've been getting and the warmer temps, it won't be long before I'm in my kayak chasing bass.
Fish. Nice.
With that, I've been thinking, man, I need to get organized, I need to get prepped, and so today I want to share with you some of the lures that I'm excited to fish with this spring. Now, most of the lures I'm going to show you are lures that have worked for me really well in years past. Some of them are actually lures that I'm just excited to try and I haven't actually caught a lot of fish on. Regardless, I gotta give you, Team Dink, credit for this video because quite frankly, I was doing an Instagram live stream the other day and I asked you guys what you want to see, and several of you commented, spring bass fishing lures. And so here we are, people, here we are. But that is enough rambling about it. Let's get right into it. So I'm not gonna go in a super specific order, but I'm gonna talk about some of the stuff that I'm most excited for early ice out first, and then I'm just gonna ease my way into spring fishing. If you've been following the channel for a while, you already know what number one is. As soon as the ice melts, a Ned rig and other small finesse plastics are some of my most confident baits. Now this year, I'm obviously super stoked to be throwing a donkey tail around. I launched these very recently and I really designed this bait to be fished for multi-species and multiple situations. Well, with that being said, because it's super buoyant and because of the small profile, it's gonna be an excellent ice out bait. Just because it has a paddle tail doesn't mean you have to work it really aggressively. You can just cast this thing out there and do a lot of dead sticking, and because it's buoyant, it's gonna stand up on the bottom, and I think that sluggish bass are gonna love it. Now the donkey tail may be the plastic that I'm most excited about. That being said, I'm obviously gonna throw other ones as well. Finesse TRDs and other small stick baits, as well as bait fish profiles, finesse tubes, finesse worms, the list goes on and on and on. The biggest key is slowing down. Now, as the water temperatures rise and you get further into spring, you can obviously pick up your cadence a little bit. You can start fishing things a little faster, but at immediate ice out, I'm all about that dead stick life. I'm not gonna go in super big depth about retrieve today because quite frankly, here in a couple weeks, we'll be on the water so you can see it firsthand. With that, let's move to number two. Okay, the next thing that I'm obviously stoked to be fishing with is a jerkbait. You guys know that I love jerkbaits. If you've been watching me for the last couple of years, I always fish jerkbaits in the spring. When I competed in college fishing tournaments at Kansas State University, I had the opportunity to fish in Missouri a lot, and I gotta be honest with you, man, a jerkbait is a staple for Midwest anglers because these things flat out get bit. Honestly, they like outproduce any other bait for a small window in the year. Don't get me wrong, a jerkbait catches fish all year long, but before the water temp hits 50, a jerkbait is pretty much unbeatable. Now this jerkbait that I have rigged up right here is actually a Berkeley Cutter 90. I picked it up because it's pretty inexpensive and I really like the finish on it. I typically fish with a full-size jerkbait, but this spring I'm really gonna try to experiment with some of these mid-size ones. It's only got 2 treble hooks, as you can see, and it's a little bit smaller profile than some of these really big ones. I don't know what I'm gonna learn, but you guys know I like experimenting with gear. Speaking of experimenting with gear, this is actually my topwater rod and it has 40-pound braid on there. I'm actually using a leader on this. I typically do not like tying leaders on casting reels. I do it all the time with spinning gear and lighter line, but when you're rocking with 40-pound braid to 8-pound line, that seems a little sketchy for me. We'll see if it works. Maybe this spring I'll learn that I really just don't like using it, but I'm gonna give it a shot. Now, according to the packaging from the Berkeley Cutter 90 Plus that I picked up, this is a suspending 3/8 of an ounce jerkbait, and it dives 4 to 6 feet. Honestly, that should be a great depth for a lot of the places that I fish. That's a little deeper than a lot of jerkbaits run. A lot of jerkbaits I find run, 3 to 4, but 4 to 6 would just be a little bit deeper, which is good because I fish a lot of clear water and those fish might get a little bit deeper. But I picked up a couple other brands as well. I'm pretty excited to fish with this Strike King KVD jerkbait as well. This is a clown color, which has been a staple in jerkbait fishing for the last million years. I honestly don't throw the clown pattern near enough. I really think on a nice sunny day, this thing's gonna just absolutely smoke them. So stay tuned for that as well. And then I also picked up one from Rapala and one from Lucky Craft. This Lucky Craft color is called Bone Pro Blue. Pretty much every jerkbait manufacturer offers this color because it's really productive. I'm pretty stoked to fish this one. I think this one looks really good. And then this Rapala, I picked it up because 1, I trust Rapala, and then 2, I thought the design was pretty unique, and this is a pretty finesse jerkbait. It's called the Ripstop, and it says it's their size 9. It says it dives 3 to 4 feet, it's 3.5 inches long, it's really slender in profile though, and it's actually only a 1/4 ounce. There's something about this color that I really, really like. Having that little bit of a blue shimmer on the inside, but then it's more of a white profile, I feel like this will be super versatile color, but it's extremely natural looking as far as bait fish imitators go. If you can't tell, tell, I'm excited to be fishing with jerkbaits this spring, not only because I've had historic success with them, but I'm also excited because I'm gonna do some experimenting with new baits that I've never used before. And then for those of you who want to learn more about jerkbait fishing, I'm really hoping to do some good on the water jerkbait videos this spring, so stay tuned for those as well. Now, just to be clear, the next lure that I actually am excited to fish with this spring is something that I have virtually no experience with. I tried it on one of my last outings in the late fall. I didn't have any success, but I've heard really good things about these and a lot of people catch fish on them, so I gotta try it. And that, my friends, is a blade bait. I only own 2 blade baits right now. They're both Megabass Dyna responses. I've got one in a 3/8 ounce and one in a 1/4 ounce. The 1/4 ounce is currently rigged up and I'm probably gonna start out with that. It resembles like a metallic bluegill type pattern and I think it's gonna get rocked. I just gotta figure out the cadence and learn a little bit more about this whole yo-yoing thing. I have a ton of experience with lipless crankbaits, which I'm gonna get to next, but these things, even though they're similar looking, I just don't really know a whole lot about them, so I'm excited to try them this spring. Okay, as mentioned, I haven't really fished with a blade bait a whole lot, but in my opinion, they are very similar to lipless crankbaits, which I have a ton of experience throwing, and I love these things in the spring, and I guarantee you I'm always gonna have some in my box when it comes to spring bass fishing. I definitely think that in the spring, I love a red color the most. That being said, I will throw pretty much any color. You can obviously tell that I'm a fan of the Strike King Red Eye Shad, but quite honestly, I feel like all lipless crankbaits are pretty good. What I like about these is they seem to catch a lot of fish and you can cast them 300 miles. Yeah, I like their colors too. I don't know, honestly, there's probably 1,000 different lipless crankbaits out there that work just as good. But as far as colors go, I really do think that a red is a great color. Something like this Spring Craw is a great color. And then like a chrome is a great color. Whether you go with like a chrome blue back or like a chrome sexy shad, it doesn't really matter. When the sun is shining, a lot of times that chrome can be dynamite. This particular lipless crankbait I've had since like high school. This was like when the Strike King Red Eye Shad first launched to the market. I picked one up in the chrome sexy shad and I have beat this thing up like crazy, but it's probably caught me so many fish. I don't even know how many fish this thing's caught me. Honestly, this thing has lasted really well. I've got a little bit of bend in the hooks, but by and large, it tends to work really well. It's funny, I really learned how to fish a lipless crankbait on just little ponds in Kansas. There was lots of vegetation in a few ponds, and I would go out there and I would just rip it out of the grass, and as soon as I'd rip it out, a lot of times they'd hit it right at the top of the rip, or as soon as it starts to flutter down, and your line would just go slack. So I really learned a lot about these things. What's really nice about these things is you can rip them free of vegetation super well, and you draw reaction bites like crazy. As soon as that water temperature eases into the 50s, I feel like this thing takes over for the jerkbait and really does an even better job. What's also nice about these things is because you can work them pretty aggressively, you can cover a ton of water. So no matter where you're at, I feel like this is an absolute staple for springtime bass fishing. Here we go. Got my crankbait stick. I picked up this rod and reel right here in high school. This is one of those classic Shimano Curados, the green ones. It's a 200 E5. This thing's in pristine condition. I bet I could get quite a bit of money for this. I'm not selling it though. This is my cranking stick and I really just don't fish it that much. The only time that I really like to fish it is when I'm fishing the river because there's not near as much vegetation there. A lot of the inland lakes that I tend to fish have a lot of vegetation, so I'm better off throwing like a lipless crankbait or something that's a little bit more weedless. But because I plan to fish the river a lot for smallmouth this year, I had to include this category. And that, my friends, is medium diving crankbaits. In particular, I really like the Bandit 200. One, because it's really inexpensive and budget friendly, and two, because this thing flat out catches fish no matter where you go. It's a really small profile, but it just straight up draws strikes. It pretty much catches fish all year round, but I really like throwing it in the early spring. And come to think of it, this is literally my favorite color. I think they call it Spring Craw. It's like a brown back with an orange belly. Literally just run this thing across the rocks in the bottom of the river, maybe bump it off a stump or something, and it gets pulverized. I am stoked to throw this very bait right here this spring. The Bandit 200 is one of my staple crankbaits, but it's not my only one. I also like, like a Rapala DT6. I'm a huge fan of the Storm Wigglewort. Just holding these crankbaits and looking at them has me super excited to catch some fish on these things. Back home in Kansas, crankbaits were a big deal because we had a lot of shallow rocks, so they worked extremely well. Up here in Michigan, man, I fish so much vegetation that I just don't throw crankbaits that much anymore. This year in the river, I gotta change that. Hold me accountable, would you? Okay, I've got a couple more lures that all fall into one more major category, and these ones are really good for as that water temperature starts to rise just a little bit more. Spinnerbaits, chatterbaits, swim jigs. Quite frankly, I just bucket all three of these together because they're all very similar. They've got skirts, they're reaction baits, you keep them moving, and they're effective in the spring. A spinnerbait, when you have low light conditions and you just really want to add a little bit of thump, sump, maybe pull it through some wood and whatnot, it's dynamite in early spring. You can actually get away with this thing in super cold water temps, and I would say this is probably the first one I would pick up, but as soon as that water temp starts to rise, a chatterbait can be extremely effective as well as a swim jig. These two I really like around vegetation, more so than the spinnerbait, whereas the spinnerbait I tend to like more around brush piles and wood. If you've got super clear water and maybe a little bit less wind, I feel like a swim jig is going to buy you a few more bites because it's just a little bit more subtle, a little bit more natural, but by and large you can throw all three of these in the spring pretty much no matter where you are. Change your color based on the forage, the water clarity, and the conditions, but overall between these three baits you're gonna catch fish, I guarantee it. Tie you on a swim jig, tie you on a spinnerbait, tie you on a chatterbait, you're gonna have some fun out there. Okay, to wrap it up, obviously I've got quite a few lures that I'm excited to fish with this spring, but here's the thing that we always need to remember about springtime bass fishing. It changes so much within the course of just 1 to 2 months. You've got early spring when the water's 44 degrees and they're really lethargic, and then you've got mid to late spring when all of a sudden the water temperature is 60 and those fish are feeding like crazy, and then they get on the bed and they start to spawn. The point is that things change super fast this time of year, and you have to be willing to change with them. Sure, you might be smoking them on a jerkbait in mid-March, but 2 weeks later that water temp might be way higher and you might be better off throwing a swim jig or a lipless crankbait, so on and so forth. So get ready, load up your spring boxes, and get out there and catch some donks. If you've made it this far in the video, I have one favor to ask you. If you have an Instagram, screenshot this video, share it to your story, and then tag me and tell me what you're most excited to fish with this spring. If you don't have an Instagram, don't worry about it. You can just drop a comment below and I'll absolutely appreciate that as well. Okay, I've been rambling about bass fishing for far too long. I could probably go all day, but the reality is I'm hungry. I gotta go downstairs, I gotta make a cheeseburger, and I gotta eat that cheeseburger. Thank you so very much for watching today's video. I hope you catch a lot of fish this spring. Good luck out there. We'll catch you next time.